Welcome, Dean Stott. It's fantastic to have you with us today. Your book is out in the UK, but it's being relaunched in America very soon. And you're also a Leupold brand ambassador, which is fantastic because obviously Viking represents Leupold in the UK. What I wanted to start with asking you about, because your book goes into a lot of detail about your background as a Royal Engineer, as a Special Forces operator, and then going through injury to not just breaking, but smashing a world record. Yeah. And I wanted to kind of take it back to the start of, your career was kind of full on with the military, but then your injury hit. And I just wondered if you could just talk us through your injury first, like what happened on that day.
Yeah, so as you touched on, I didn't go the normal traditional route, going from the Royal Engineers to the Special Boat Service. So I was one of the first army candidates to do that, much to the disgust of my friends who were in the SAS. I went to the Special Boat Service, and 16 years into my career, we were going back out to Afghanistan again on another tour. We were doing pre-deployment training in Oman. But for me, I'd reached the pinnacle in my career. I was working alongside like-minded individuals, people with the same sort of drive and passion of always pushing the boundaries. And so for me, I never had any expectations of leaving the military. I was what they would call a lifer. And so we were out in Oman doing what's called a hey-ho jump. It's a high altitude, high opening jump. It's a method of insertion which we'd used before operationally in Afghanistan. And I'd done hundreds of these jumps before, and it was about the third or fourth jump of the day, exit the aircraft as normal. But this time when I looked up, my foot was in the lines above my head. So I was in a situation I'd never been in before. And so I was frantically trying to kick my leg out in time, and I couldn't. My leg got pulled up over my head and to the right. So straight away, because of the pain, I was vomiting. And at 15,000 feet, your limits of oxygen, I was also drifting in and out of consciousness. But my first challenge was to try and land this parachute. I approached the DZ, saw the approach of my comrades, and landed one-legged. It was an excellent landing, actually, in para terms. But unfortunately, the damage sustained, I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus in my knee, my hamstring, my calf, and my quadriceps, all the supporting muscles as well. So after 16 years, unfortunately, that was the end of my military career. I hadn't really had any visions of leaving the military. And so for me, that came as a real shock. And there was no build-up time. It was like, no, thank you for your time. It's time to leave. So I sort of went through what was known as an identity crisis. And I got to where I was in the military through my sort of physical robustness. That's where I got to in my life. And I didn't really recognize myself anymore. I couldn't even run 100 meters without my knee giving way. So lots going on. And to add to the pressure, my wife was also 8 months pregnant as well. So worrying about entering this new environment, which is alien to us, which is the civilian sector, and understanding what my role and purpose now was within society.
Did you ever think, when that happened and you were going through the recovery from the injury, did you ever think you would be where you are now?
No, not at all. If you'd asked me 11 years ago, this is where you would be, this is what you would have achieved, I would have thought you were talking about someone else completely. More so because what I'm doing now is more in the public domain, and I've spent majority of my life, and when I was in the security sector, under the shadows. So I always say I still do a lot of stuff in the security sector, and I always say there are two Dean Stotts. There's the one that you see with the brand ambassadors with Leupold, with books and TV, and then there's still Dean that's very much working behind the scenes on some of the private security stuff. But no, I think you just, life throws those curveballs at you. Of course, I'd never wanted to be injured. I would love to still have been serving in the Special Boat Service, but if one avenue is blocked, you just go down another avenue. But as long as you have the right mindset and approach, anything's achievable. And as you read with Relentless, I got to my pinnacle in my career in the military, and unfortunately was told I couldn't do it, and then succeeded again in the security industry. But to then do it in a sport you've never done before, it's not luck. It's obviously a mindset and an approach to everything you do.
And you talk a lot in your book about bonding. I think it was with a rugby player who'd also sustained a career-changing injury. And what would you say to someone who, say last week had a similar injury? At that moment in time, what words of advice would you give to them when they're just looking at a really uncertain future?
Yeah, I think obviously at the time, when I look back, I would have done things completely different. I didn't even acknowledge that there was a problem. But if you speak to my wife, she'll give you a totally different answer to mine. But it's almost like, for me, it's almost appreciate that actually I was still there. I was alive. I lost a lot of friends. So at least I was still there, thankfully for my family. But, things do get better, and just take one stage at a time. One thing I've learned over life is that I'm always quick to try and get back into the game, and then you get injured again. So listen to the advice of others that have been there before. And it's hard, when you have a sort of background like ours, we are very impatient. We want to do it, and we want to do it yesterday, not today. So yeah, probably just appreciate the fact that you are still here, and then just take time and have a plan as well. Have a plan, and have a couple of plans, because one plan may not work. It's always good to have a secondary and a tertiary.
What do you think you would have chosen as the challenge if Alana hadn't given you the Guinness Book of World Records and said, here, go find a challenge? How would you have got that adrenaline fix that seems to have kind of pervaded your life?
Yeah, well, I think as you read the book, the reason we had that conversation is, I worked in the security industry, and, I just single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy out of Libya on my own, 18 military and 4 diplomats. And so for me, I was living a lifestyle where that was my adrenaline, that was my go-to, that was my rush. And so I took a sabbatical from the security industry. And so it had to be something other than that. Alana said, you need to do something to keep yourself physically and mentally engaged. The reason we chose the bike ride was because that was 5 years after the injury. My injured leg now was 2 kilos lighter than my good leg. And so I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. And so what I was doing, I hadn't really come to terms with the fact that I'd left the military. I was still trying to match that adrenaline rush that I had when I was in there without actually having that top cover and support if something had gone wrong. So for me, it had to be a challenge that was going to test me physically and mentally, and something I could really get behind. So I bought a push bike off Amazon, and never really cycled before. I think I cycled 8 miles there and back from the office. And so, yeah, I said to Alana, I've always fancied a world record. And so, yeah, I was thinking living in Scotland, I was thinking maybe east to west coast of Scotland. But then Alana then found the world's longest road, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska. So I sort of joked that she wanted me out the house at that point. And just for the listeners, 14,000 miles from southern Argentina to northern Alaska, because of the curvature of the earth, it's the equivalent of cycling from London to Sydney and then another 4,000 miles. But having only cycled 20 miles, I thought, yeah, that's the challenge for me. It sounds quite arrogant in my approach, but I knew mentally and endurance-wise, I had that mindset. I just needed to do it in a sport I'd never done before. And cycling was good because it wasn't aggravating or hampering my knee. And so that's why we decided to do that one. I know, but I didn't have visions of doing the world's longest road. But for me, what that brought is additional challenges. I was going through countries I'd never been to before, some of them, but also very, very fortunate in the military, having been in the desert, the Arctic, the jungle. And I literally was going through all those sort of environments and terrains on this challenge. So that's what was the attraction.
And I mean, the big thing as well is that you raised £1 million for charity, for Heads Together, which is the charity that was set up by William, Harry and Kate.
Yeah.
And it supports mental health, not just in the veteran community, but mental health across the spectrum of community. When we talk about the issue of kind of mental health, mental strength, for you, do you think it's nature, nurture, or a combination of both? When you think of resilience and relentlessness, how do normal people come back and come out fighting?
Yeah, I think there's an element of nature and nurture, and also the support network around you. I see a lot of guys and girls transitioning out. Some of them are having a turbulent time, some are having much smoother time. And I tend to see that those that's more smoother have a great support network around you. You touched on Heads Together. I originally this bike ride was going to be for modern slavery and human trafficking, and that's what me and my wife are very big into. And that route was one of the more prevalent routes that we were doing. But Harry and I met each other 15 years ago on a JTAC course and been friends since. So I called him, told him what I was doing, and him and I had done a lot of stuff in the more in the veteran charity areas before. So I wasn't really aware about mental health too much until I got introduced to Heads Together. And I'd seen it firsthand with some of my friends in the military, but I wasn't aware how big an issue it was throughout the whole of society, postnatal depression, young children, teenagers. So it really did open my eyes about it. And again, I didn't really know too much. I got introduced to the Royal Foundation, and they're like, what's your message? What's your messaging? And I was like, I didn't really have a message. I came in here because Harry told me to come speak to you. I didn't, but so I looked inwards, and after a couple of minutes, I sort of said, well, look, physical activity helps your mental state. And I was told, no, you can't use that. This was back in 2017. I said, well, why not? They said, it's not being scientifically proven. I said, that's fine, but I don't need a scientist to tell me that I feel good when I'm training. So I ignored them anyway and carried on banging the drum. So there's obviously three areas to mental health. There's the pharmaceutical, which you want to avoid. There's communication. So my messaging was always the physical activity. Back to your question, the nature or the nurture. If I look back at Dean Stott, age 17, when he joined the army, would I be able to achieve what I did, with the world record? Probably not. So I think there is an element. There's got to be a slight element of nature, but I think there's a lot of nurture. I learned a lot from my time in the military. There's a great phrase, you can't be experienced without experiences. So everything I did in my life, I took something from that and then just moved forward. And, whether it was a good thing, whether it was a bad thing, learn from your mistakes. I do get asked, would you change anything? Speaking back to Dean 16, would you change anything? I said, no, I would do everything exactly the same, because that's what's carved me out to here. So yeah, I think there's an element of nurture in there.
That's a really good answer, and I think it's just something that, as I was reading, I was just thinking this is such a unique story, because there's not many people who I think could do that, or indeed they can't because they haven't done it. But it kind of made me think more about the wider veteran angle. And the Office for Veterans Affairs in the UK, they've launched a huge campaign, and they want to make the UK the best place to be a veteran in 2028, by 2028. I wondered, from your perspective, what support could be improved for veterans in the UK? If you could choose 3 things to improve on, what would they be?
3 things. That's a very good question. No, it's night and day living here in the US compared to the UK. I sort of remember when I joined the military at 95, in 95, you had short hair and tattoos. You weren't even allowed in a nightclub. And then here, like, their approach to the military is totally different. But I think obviously likes of Afghan and Iraq, that they sort of really changed people's perception on veterans, especially when we started seeing more and more coming back with life-changing injuries. For me, is not so much when you're in the military, it's great. They will do everything to support you. It's that period of time when you then leave the gates, and that's it. You are forgotten. I will only use myself as an example. After my injury, it took me 5 years to win a tribunal hearing again to get my pension. I got to the top of where I was. They pumped millions of pounds into me, training me up. But then as soon as you're gone, it's like you're almost forgotten. They say that they do a lot for veterans, and I sort of disagree. But I know the likes of Johnny Mercer and the Office of Veterans Affairs. I know Johnny Mercer because I was his instructor on his commando course when he was a young second lieutenant. So I've seen him grow through the ranks. And so he's doing a lot on behalf of the veterans. And I have seen changes over the years, but there's a lot more that can be improved. It's the follow-up, it's the aftercare. It's not so much when you're in, it's what you're doing for them afterwards. I think I had a follow-up call when I left, 10 weeks, just someone rang me up, how are things, have you got a job? Yeah, I've got a job. That was it. That was my follow-up from the military. And it's not enough. They pump a lot of millions into us, they train us up, and then they sort of leave us on our own. So I don't know what the actual answer is. You can look here to what the US do, but even when you speak to the veterans here, they still haven't got it right either. They have the funding, but is the funding going in the right places? For me, is really, well, I would say the main answer was the transition. The military are great. Like, your father, your mother, they clothe you, they feed you, they pay you on time. I didn't know what heat band or council tax band we were paying on camp. I didn't care because I was doing the job that I loved. So some things that the civilian sector have been doing all their life. They know who to deal with in the council. They live in that civilian sector. For us leaving the military, that's normally done for you. So it's really those transition skills, giving the right person wherever you're moving to, who's a point of contact at the local council, get you set up in all those things. But also look at the transition workshop. A friend of mine, he left the military special boat service for about 3 years ago, reached out and he said, Dean, I sort of helped him out get some work and got him a client, and he's like, how do I do a proposal or an NDA? And I'm like, well, that's quite, for me, it was quite simple because I've been out for a while. So I did this for him, and I said, well, what are you getting taught now back in when you leave the military? And he's at CV writing and interview techniques. That's it, and it stops there. And I was like, well, I've never had an interview, and I've never given them on my CV. But if someone taught me about NDAs or how to write proposals, and so it's those other sort of business skills that I think they should be doing. They have people, these business experts, but they're not really business experts. It's LE officers who are just trying to find a job for them that they don't actually have to leave, who've had no experience in the corporate sector. So I think there should be a department or some sort of assistance on that. And there's actually, when you speak to the guys and girls that leave, that they really worry. They're actually head and shoulders above their peers. The skill sets you get from the military outweigh whatever the civilian sector gets. But, I do a lot of international guest speaking and get flown in by these big corporates, and they are fascinated. I call it the battlefield to the boardroom. They are fascinated in the decision making we make under pressure in high octane environments. And it's like, how do you guys and girls remain calm? Especially when the plan doesn't go to plan. For us, it's normal. So we already have those skill sets and experiences. It's just understanding the language. J4 or J4 in the military, it is, it's the stores. It's just doing that. So I think if they could do that, that would help a lot more people, and then just making sure they follow up on what they say they're going to do and do it. But I know Johnny's really big behind this, and hopefully you'll see some big changes.
Yeah, I think now he's back in. It's a really good sign. A really good sign. It's really interesting to talk to you about those subjects because I think they need to be talked about, because it's only from people like you who've come out the other side and have a success story that can share that those insights. And so moving on to scopes, so we've done a bit of work with Jimmy DeVille, who I think is is he still a serving Royal Engineer?
He's an engineer for some time, Royal Engineer. Now he's a TV presenter.
I just thought it was interesting. You're both engineers. You have worked with high-end products like Leupold scopes. And I wanted to ask you, kind of, as a former Royal Engineer, former SBS, or technically kind of is still part of the family with them. But what value do you place on quality kit and quality engineering?
For us, we were always taught in the military is trust your kit. So whether you're parachuting, whether you're hanging off the side of a ship, whether you're diving, or whether you're firing rounds down the range. I did notice when I went to the Special Forces that we were very lucky to get exposure to equipment probably the rest of the Green Army weren't. And it wasn't the most expensive kit. It was just the quality of the product. Yeah, quality is key, really, for you to be able to do, we've got to worry about so many other things that we can't then be worrying about the kit. So we know that we've got the best top quality kit, and that's one thing less for us to worry about, and it enables us to do our job more and more effectively. So there's a lot of reliance on the quality of the equipment, definitely.
How did you come across Leupold?
Yeah, well, as Andy touched on with the book Relentless, and very much being the strapline for Leupold is Be Relentless. So I got invited to the SHOT Show in Las Vegas beginning of last year, and I flew in. And coming from the UK is a different culture from living in the US. Obviously here, you have access to weapons and everything, the Second Amendment. And so I sort of went in not really knowing what to expect. I didn't realize how big it was and how big an industry it was in the US. So I went around, I got introduced to a few of the brands, and it was just, I saw Be Relentless. And so that's what sort of took me over in that direction initially. But I had spoken to a gentleman earlier on in the day from Barrett, and we were talking about some of the next weapon systems that they had, and showing me the weapons. I mean, they had 2 scopes on them. And, I'd never heard of Leupold in the UK Special Forces. We had other scopes at the time. But I was obviously a sharp shooter in the SBS, so I did have a passion for shooting. And so I said, oh, who are these brands? And he mentioned Leupold, mentioned another brand. He said, well, I'll tell you now, if you had the choice, I wouldn't go anyone but Leupold. And so, okay. Then I saw the Be Relentless sign. Met a gentleman called Nick, just got chatting with him. And then not long after that, there was a big shooting event, and he invited me along. And there were other brands there, and, I firing them all. And yeah, Leupold was great. But what I like to do is also speak to those that were using it, other friends of mine here in the US, especially in the Special Forces. And it was just, when you talk about quality, Leupold was always the number one choice for them all. So for me, it was the perfect marriage, as they say. And so I've obviously since then been using them. And I went shooting one day when I was in the SBS. We used to have the Sig Sauer pistol as our sidearm, but we just had iron sights. And here, Leupold then gave me the Delta Point Micro on the Glock, and I'd never fired a red dot. And I was sort of, initially I was missing everything. And then I was like, take it off, let's go back to the iron sight. But no, one of the Leupold guys pulled me aside and then, sort of trained me all day. And yeah, it changed my thinking on how you use a weapon compared to what I was used to, just because I'd never had that exposure before. And so, yeah, that's how Leupold and I then sort of formed up and had a relationship.
So with you said you got kind of hands-on with a lot of their range, their scopes. Which ones are your kind of go-to products from Leupold if we're talking about rifle scopes?
Yeah, the rifle scope for me was the Mark 5 HD. That was the one I like. We took it from a normal range and then went out to Wyoming, out into the wild there, and started using it there. And for me, it wasn't so much being able to use it. I saw the way, we were having to cover some ground, and it wasn't flat ground, and the weapons are getting banged about. And I was with a couple of other guys, and I was conscious that, we damaged the scopes, and we hadn't. They're going through some really tough tests and still performing. But I hadn't used the Mark 5 before that, but it's sort of, from then on, that's it. That's all I have now on my as a scope. But that's my sort of go-to. And as I touched on, I'd never used red dot on pistol. It was always iron sight, because for us it was a secondary. If your primary had a stoppage, it wasn't our primary weapon. But the more that I've now used it, I've really sort of changed my thinking. And for anyone, if they get an opportunity, would red dot on a pistol. So the Mark 5 HD and the Delta Point Micro, my two go-tos.
How do you, in the States, do you go out hunting? Do you go to the range? How do you interact with them?
A bit of both, really. There's obviously always events around the country. Again, like I said, I knew, I don't know if it was naive of me, but I knew obviously in the US that, people had access to guns, but, hunting here is huge. So for me, it depends where I am as well, because I've obviously got a busy lifestyle. So for me, if I want to get some quick rounds down the range, there's I call it a country club rather than a country club, called Hot Rods and Handguns down in Huntington Beach. It's got a restaurant, a cigar bar, whiskey bar, but you can go in there. And so that's where I tend to do a lot of the pistol work, just to stay on top of that. But then also I'm still doing a lot in the security industry, like training sort of militaries as well. So any opportunity I can get with them on the ranges. Obviously with a young family, I'm slowly starting to get into more of the hunting aspect of things. But these can last from one day up to a week. So that's something I'm sort of stepping into. I have that military stuff, the range stuff is simple, but now I'm sort of putting that into use on some live hunts.
So for the live hunts, just out of interest, what rifle have you chosen to take out with you for those hunts?
So at the moment, I'm just borrowing one. It's actually quite funny because I've literally just had my visa approved for the US. So we moved over 2 years ago, right in the middle of COVID. So all the embassies were shut. So I've now but you can't buy a rifle until you have your visa and your social security number. And then you've got to wait 90 days. So I think I have about 2 weeks left. So at the moment, I am just borrowing. It's actually quite funny that I'm sponsored by a tactical clothing brand, an optics thing, an optics company. My friend gives me ammunition. I just don't have anything to fire it through. So at the moment, I'm beg stealing and borrowing everything that when we're on the ground. So I haven't got my go-to yet, but that's something I'm probably going to sort of choose shortly.
What's in the running to be selected?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to give away too much because I'm chatting to a couple of. I'd probably take advice from Andy and Rob. If you guys have got any top tips for me, if any of you guys think they're the big standouts, if I had the choice, yeah.
I think the big standout and where you are in America, the obvious choice for your background and the way you look at kit would have to be the Ruger precision rifle.
Yeah. Do you agree, Rob?
I think if you're going to do some long range target, I think probably. But if you're looking for a hunting weapon, it's too long, it's too heavy. Anything from Mossberg or Ruger, I'd go for.
Really? Okay, yeah. Perfect.
What about a Merkel?
I was obviously in the SBS. I was used to the HK 417, so I probably. But then again, it's not really a hunting weapon out here.
The Ruger precision is used quite a bit for hunting out there. However, it lends itself especially to the range work and is very well received in America. And the champions in the PRS, some of the champions are actually using the Mark V and the Ruger precision as a combination. A man built like yourself could handle a Ruger precision like the average man could handle a hunting rifle. So,
I'll have to look into that. And I think that's the thing. That was my real eye opener going from the UK to here, because like when you're in the special forces, you're like, well, this is your weapon. This is your weapon. You don't have a choice. This is it. And this is the sights you're going to be using. Whereas you come here and there's such a variety, and it takes about 4 days to walk around the SHOT Show. And I was just like, how do you differentiate between them? And so for me, it's getting that knowledge from people like yourselves, people who are out there shooting. But as we all know, we all have our own sort of steers towards something that we're used to. Like for me, for example, the bike ride. I use all bare bikes, and people are, have you tried this bike? I don't know, because I've only ever used one bike. And so for me, that works. And so I suppose as individuals, whatever works for you. There's something probably what I'll do. I'll probably spend a bit more time, a bit of trial and error with different ones, and then maybe I'll come back to you soon with my final decision.
Well, you're certainly in the right place to do that, aren't you?
Oh, without a doubt. It's like, when we talk about the pistols, like the Glocks came in after I left, so for me it was the SIG. I'm happy with the SIG, but then when you try some of these other pistols, it's like, oh yeah, these are great. So I'm like a kid in a toy shop, really. I've got the opportunity to really sort of trial and error on some of these, but I'll come back with you guys with my final my top 3 list.
Are you going to go back to SHOT Show next year?
Yeah, so I'm in SHOT Show this year, January. I'm doing a book signing at Leupold booth and at 511's booth as well. So I'll be going there and probably having a look at a few weapon systems as well this time.
I wanted to ask you quickly, is when you chose to do the bike challenge, you were basically a novice rider, and entering, getting into hunting, how do you find the hunting community over there in terms of, in comparison to the UK bike community? Because your book made me laugh when you were talking about cycling past all these people in Lycra and you with your kind of bulky non-rider form. So like breaking into new communities, how do you feel about breaking into the kind of the hunting or shooting community in the States?
Yeah, I think just to give some background for probably Andy and Rob. So when I'd never cycled before, and where I lived in Scotland, Deeside Thistle, they were called, the largest and oldest cycling community in the UK. But because I didn't have the right sort of bike, I was almost being snubbed. When I was cycling, and people were looking at me. And then a few months later, I did the ETAP Ness around Loch Ness and came to like 140th out of 2,500. So they all then started chatting to me, and actually I said, look, I need to cycle on my own anyway. So you tend to find that it's quite snobbery, the cycling community. You need to have the right bike, right equipment and things like that. And actually, whereas for me, it's like, well, it's got nothing to do with equipment. You peel it back, it's your legs and your mindset. But thankfully, my sponsorship marketing team did a SWOT analysis on the bike ride, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats. And the only weakness that came back was my arrogance towards the cycling community. This 40-year-old stocky guy thinks he's going to cycle 14,000 miles. thankfully no one said that in the cycling community, but it was felt a couple of times. But back to your original question, the hunting community, yes, I was in the special forces and I've done some great things in that, but I haven't been hunting before, and I'm quite transparent to that. And for them, they really sort of took me in with open arms, and they're like, they don't see it was just appreciated more, or you're sort of welcomed with open arms. I think they were really pleased that I decided I wanted to do something that they all have a love for. And for me, I was like, I always like to learn from people. I just treat me as a blank canvas. We have a phrase, don't teach me to suck eggs. For me, I'm like, just tell me everything, and I'll be a sponge. So yeah, the hunting community, very different from the cycling community. They were happy to share all their knowledge, their lessons learned, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. I think I talk about in my book, one thing we do in the special forces is every time we come off operations or exercises or whatever we're doing, we have a hot debrief, and there's 3 questions, and it's like, what worked, what didn't work, and if we can do that again, what would we do differently? And so they're the sort of questions I ask these people. And no, but they've been great. And my phone is constantly people telling me that we're off to such and such state, and especially now, up in Montana and places like that. And so yeah, they're inviting me to a lot of events. I just need to find more time, but yeah, very much more receptive than it was from the cycling community.
That's really good to hear, because it was kind of sad reading that part of the book, having read what you went through, to then have that kind of negativity.
It wasn't. I could sort of see it wasn't really a cycling community. It's probably more those that make money doing this all their lives, who are endurance cyclists. That who does this guy think he is coming in? And I just did it to prove a point. And so I know I sort of joke that the kayaking community will be feeling that soon, but they're not. Again, the kayaking community have been really receptive as well on my next challenge.
So that's what I wanted to ask you about. You finished your book talking about the next challenge being kayaking the Nile. When are you doing it, and what's your training going like for it?
So I was originally, obviously, I never looked beyond the bike ride. I did the bike ride, so I wasn't smuggling people across borders and burying weapons in the desert and stuff like that. So I didn't see a career in guest speaking, books or TV. So when people came out, I said, what's next? So I've enjoyed cycling. I dipped my toe in cycling. So my USP is I like to take a sport I've never done before and find the biggest challenge. So having cycled the world's longest road, I wanted to kayak the world's longest river, obviously being the Nile. COVID then hit, which sort of scuppered the whole plans there. But then me and my family decided to move to America during COVID while the world was paused. And so we sort of come here and set up. Everyone loves the idea. It's one of them ones. It doesn't matter how many millions you've raised for charity or how many world records you got. We're in a society where, how many Instagram followers you've got? I'm not really. It's a world I'm not used to. So chatting to sponsors and some of the TV, the production companies, they love the concept, but they want me to sort of build the profile more. So the Nile is put on pause, and I'm currently working, I've got to be careful what I say because I'm under embargo, but currently working on a huge show of one of the main streamers. It's a military show. I go around the world, getting a slight insight into the world's elite forces. So working on those projects at the moment, and what that will then do, it will raise your profile, and then I can then bring the Nile back in. It'd be easier to get sponsorship. And from a philanthropy fundraising aspect, the more eyes that are on you, then the more money you can raise. Like you said, we raised £930,000 on the bike ride with it I wasn't even on social media then. I literally started the week before. If you use correctly with the right team around you, you can make more than that. So that's the plan.
And who will you be raising money for?
This one will be more modern slavery and human trafficking. We will also touch on climate change. One of the biggest challenge with the bike ride was actually the target of raising the money. We put ourselves under so much pressure on that actually the bike ride, I sort of joke, was quite easy. My wife sort of runs all the fundraising in the background. So we won't set a target. And as they won't set a target, but there will be a fundraising page for that. And again, we'll just take our lessons learned from the previous challenge and then adjust to this. This comes with different threats, crocodiles, hippos, civil war in South Sudan.
God.
So yeah, it'll be good.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, Alana's resilience, and of course you've got 3 children now. She just had another one recently, didn't she?
Yeah, about 7 weeks ago. Yeah.
I mean, she sounds like a phenomenal person, and just the support that she's kind of given you throughout is pretty phenomenal. And it kind of brings me back to one of my final questions. You mentioned Prince Harry earlier, just how you'd met him on the JTAC course, and come in and out of your life, and then you'd ended up working on the charity together. I mean, you've got your book out in a few weeks, and then he's obviously got his book out in January. Do you still talk? Are you still in kind of comms with him, or have any banter around the books going out and competing?
No, we still talk. You know, we're very, as you realise in the book, you know, I got into North America on day 70 and I was 14 days ahead of the world record. I mean, I was like, perfect, you know, I've got loads of time. And then Alana rings me and tells me we've been invited to Harry and Meghan's wedding, which changed the dynamics completely of the bike ride. So, you know, with him, you know, I finished that bike ride 2 days later, we had the royal wedding. And so every time I tend to do something, it gets overshadowed by him. You know, I got back, and all the interviews were like, oh, what were the canapes? What did you drink at the wedding? I'm like, really? I've just smashed 2 world records, become the first man in history. And then my book got launched in the UK, and then him and Meghan had done something in South Africa. So I'm trying to find a period of time where he's not going to be sort of overshadowing me. So thankfully my book comes out 2 months before his. So at least I can get my own sort of exposure. But it's one of the ones that, you know, we're very much still in communications. It's only up the road. You know, we do a lot together, but not distancing. But you know, I have my own story. You know, I'm otherwise known as Prince Harry Special Forces friend, which is fine. But, you know, I've been called worse. But, you know, it's almost like you can never get away from that. That's the problem. You're always going to be, when you have a friend like that, he's always going to be in the shadows, or people are going to be asking questions. So thankfully for me, the book will get released before his book.
See, maybe you can give him some banter about picking him to the post first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. See if he can sign me a book.
Yeah. And I had one final question for you, and it was really, what does the term relentless mean to you?
Relentless originally, especially with the book title, was just going to be a holding title. You know, one of the ethos of the UK Special Forces is the unrelenting pursuit of excellence. You know, is that you just do everything to the best of your ability. And obviously, you know, some people will always compare themselves to others. And that's the problem with like social media. People look at other people and, you know, think they're not capable of being able to do that. But as long as you can look at yourself in the mirror each day and know that you've given 100% and you can't ask for any more. And that's, I mean, for me, it's just jumping in 2 feet, giving it 100%. That's being relentless. Whether you achieve your aim or whether you fail, as long as you know that you give it 100%, then you can't ask for any more. But you know, whether that's in the special forces, whether that's in sport, whether that's in finance, whether you're a carpenter, you know, it's just giving it your 100% and always looking to sort of improve. You know, we're in a sort of society where people are scared of the word failure. No, failure is a bad word. You know, for me, you know, I call it experience. You know, if you've changed the word to experience rather than failure, then people's mindsets will be slightly different. But, you know, as long as you learn from that failure / experience and don't repeat it, then you've learned from it. If you then repeat it, then you obviously haven't learned from it. So for me, it's just that, you know, the answer to the question, just giving it 100% all the time.
Thank you so much, Dean. I think that's been really insightful, and I hope I haven't kind of given too much of your book away in that interview.
Well, we all know that I broke a world record anyway, so that's it.
Andy, Rob, I know I've completely stolen Dean in most of that. Sure. Are there any questions that you guys want to ask Dean specific to PMD sporting that I haven't covered?
Yeah, I've got maybe 1 or 2. At the moment, you're using a long-range sniper scope or a long-range target, whichever theatre you're working in at the time, which is obviously lending itself now to the hunting scene, which is something that we have started in the UK hunting market to see. I think because the product is at that top end in one field, it's so robust, so strong, I think it then lends itself to filter down into the hunting market as opposed to the other way around. So my question would be, are you going to stick with the Mark V HD, maybe a different reticle for a different situation, or would you look at other specific hunting scopes in the Leupold range? And what rangefinder do you use?
So for me, the answer to the question, I would look at other scopes. I'm actually flying up to Leupold factory on the 27th up there, and I'm getting an optics 1-to-1 lesson from the team up there. So I'm going to have exposure to all of their potential scopes. And so my answer to the question, at the moment, I use the Mark V because that's all I've used from Leupold. But once I sort of test some of the others, and I have no doubt I will use some of those. But no, I'm really looking forward to going up to Leupold on the 27th. It's the first time I've been up to the factory and sort of really getting insight into all their scopes. And again, they're still learning. I message, people message me on my posts from Leupold, asking me great questions like you guys are asking. I'm like, well, some of these are new to me, but the great thing about the Leupold team, they'll come in and they'll answer those more detailed questions. So for me, I'm still, I'm not a blank canvas. I'm still learning myself. And so you'll probably see over time, as my posts change, there'll be different sites I'm using. There'll be different weapons probably as well. So yeah, if we have a conversation in maybe a year's time, if we're talking completely different, probably have a different weapon, different scope, the lot, just purely because I've had chance to use it. What also people are probably not aware is that Leupold now got a new range of sunglasses as well. Sort of really using and promoting them. They've been quite good as well. And in the military community, because over here, the SEALs all use gaiters, and it's like, so I've been giving these guys some of the Leupold glasses, and they've changed. They love them.
Thank you for listening, and if you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe on Podbean for more, and visit vikingshoot.com for more details about Viking Arms, Merkel rifles, and Leupold Optics.